Okay, so this is going to be a video showing the different parts of the pre-impactor that you have just received, um, going over what they are, as well as how to load them and unload them from the UPAS. So let's first go over the pieces that you already know about, right? So I have my UPAS with me right here. I happen to have a V2 Plus, which has this extra little block on the front, which has the real-time sensors in it. You probably are not using one of these, but the place where the cyclone fits, where you screw in that cyclone and put the filter, is exactly the same. So for our purposes, this will work just fine. You probably are also very familiar with the cyclone cap, right? So your cyclone is inside there, and you have all been using these for quite some time. You have your filter cassette. Again, I'm sure you're all very familiar with these. And then you also have the cyclone insert. So this is what sits at the base. And there is something important about this. So the one that I have here is the one that should have come with your pre-impactors. And you should see on here that there is an R1 that's etched into this. So if you don't see an R1, you know you're not using the right cyclone insert, this amber piece. I have one of the old ones here. And if you look on the back, you won't see an R1 etched into it anywhere. And it's important because if you don't use the R1 version, then the pre-impactor won't sit right in the cyclone. You'll be able to tell. It will feel loose, it won't feel right. But just a heads up that you want to make sure that you're using the right impactor or the right insert for your impactor. Again, should have this R1 on here. Where did that go? There it is, right? So just make sure you have that R1 in there, okay? And then there are two pieces to the insert itself, right? There's this white piece, and this is the pre-impactor insert. And what this does is it creates a really difficult path for the particles to go through. So there are three places where there are little inlets here, and then the particles have to weave their way around this really kind of complicated path with all sorts of opportunities to impact within this white piece, right? And something that we want to do with this one is we want to put just a little bit of our silicone oil in here, because that'll help the particles stick. And I'll go over that in a second. And then the last piece is the impaction plate, or the impactor substrate. And this is where we'll get a fair amount of impaction of particles as well. This piece is made out of a sintered metal or a porous stainless steel. So there are two things that are important about it being porous. One is it can absorb that oil and it will diffuse throughout all of the substrate. The other thing is that being porous, it has a rougher surface, so particles will stick to it more easily than if it was a piece of smooth stainless steel. Also be careful, because this piece can bend more easily than just a regular piece of stainless steel. I mean, you still have to bend it pretty hard to make it happen, but it will bend more easily than if it was just a regular piece of stainless steel. So do be a little careful with these. All right, so when we're loading the pre-impactor insert, there are two things that we need to do. And this is aside from washing, which we're not gonna go through any of the washing in this protocol, in this video, but it is in the protocol, and of course it's important. But assuming that your pieces are washed and ready to go, there are two things that you need to do before heading out to the field with your cyclones loaded. One, we need to take the pre-impactor, this piece right here, the white piece, and we want to put a little bit of that oil on here. So we want this to be really, really light. We do not want to even be able to kind of tell that it's on there. So all we're going to do is take a tiny bit of this oil, and just take a tiny bit of this oil, and we're going to put it on one of your tapered swabs, just so it's wet with the oil. And you'll be able to see it. See how that gets translucent in there. Just a little tiny bit. You don't want to be dripping. You just want a little tiny bit of that oil. So you can barely even see it. So now that this has some of that silicone oil on it, we want to put it most importantly in the places where the inlet is, where the inlets are, so that if there are any particles that come through, they can stick right there. So I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna put this little, there's a little kind of half moon section, get that section, get the sections that are close to that inlet, and those are gonna be the most important because you're gonna have your most impaction there. And then you can put some throughout here. Anywhere there's kind of corners, nooks and crannies, can't hurt. You just never wanna see any accumulation of the impactor oil, so just be careful that you're not applying too much, okay? So that should be ready to go there. The other thing we want to do, and we only do this every 2 weeks, this is in the protocol, but we want to load the pre-impactor substrate with that silicone oil as well. And all we're going to do for that is put 3 tiny little dots equally spaced around here. There's 1, 2, 3. So you can see 3 little dots of oil that I put on there. And then you just generally want to let it sit for a few minutes, and that oil will diffuse. It'll work its way throughout the substrate. If you've put too much on there, or if it's already had a lot of oil in there, then it'll just kind of sit on the top for a while. It won't diffuse, and that's fine. All you need to do is blot it out. So normally we would wait for a few minutes and wait for it to diffuse throughout, and that's fine. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to take a Kim wipe and I'm just going to blot out the excess so that we can move on to the next step. And this is what it looked like. You just blot it up. There's nothing tricky about that. Okay. Okay, so how do we load this? We're going to load this by making kind of like a little sandwich with this is our plate at the bottom. So this is our cyclone, right? And the first piece that's going to go in here is your pre-impactor, the white piece. And you just flip it over. The posts, you can see the holes. These are all the inlets where the particles can come in. And you just want to flip it upside down. And those little white posts, they need to slide in. And you'll feel them slide in, and then you can see them poking out through the outside, right? And you can tell if it's in there because this won't move around. The white piece won't shift around anymore. It'll settle in there, and then you know it's been inserted properly. The next piece is your pre-impactor, right? The substrate, so that fits on there. Next, okay. And then we have our cyclone insert, so that's the next piece that goes in there. And you just press that down. And you'll know that you've done this properly if this doesn't fall out, right? If I had this other insert in here, this would be loose and the pieces would fall out. But it's not falling out, so I know I've done this correctly. And then it's just like you've always done. You have your filter, you load your filter, right? You load your filter, screw this in. You may have a tool. I don't have one of those tools to tighten this, but again, you just want this finger tight. You don't want to do this super tight. Should feel okay. And again, you can see those little white posts coming out there, and they go just above the top of the cyclone, so you can feel them poking out. If they aren't poking out, if they aren't lined up, then you know you haven't put it in there correctly. All right, so that's how we load it. And then unloading is going to be pretty much the same process, just in reverse. So if you're done with your sample, unscrew your cyclone. You've got your filter, which you're going to go put wherever it needs to be weighed. And then this process works the same, right? We can see our cyclone insert. And then just like we have in the past, we're gonna get this out by using some type of a blunt, like just like the end of this tapered Q-tip, some type of blunt thing to poke through here, and then we'll pop it out. Got your cyclone. You got your insert, right? And if this was after a sample, you'd probably see a fair amount of dust and debris in here that would be impacting on the sides. And then same thing here. With this, you would see three places. You'd see three places where there'd be impaction because there are three holes that lead from that that pre-impaction piece down to this substrate. So you see three spots. You wipe that off. For a regular one, you just wipe it off with a Kim wipe. For kind of a regular between samples procedure, every 2 weeks we're recommending a deep clean. So you would take your substrate and you would clean it just like you clean the rest of the pieces with detergent and water. Right. So you take this out, wipe it off, clean it. You have your cyclone insert as well, which will need to be cleaned before the next sample, and you're ready to go. So hopefully that's not too much of an additional burden to include the pre-impactor insert, and it should help collect all those larger particles that we've seen getting through.